Welcome to the Commercial Awareness Compass. This is your weekly guide to developing commercial insight in a way that goes beyond just the news. Each week, we focus on one major news story and we break it down for you in a way that's easy to understand while giving you practical insights to use in your applications and your interviews. So we'll go through 3 levels for you: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. I'm Tori. I'm a future trainee solicitor, and I'm joined by Henry, a corporate lawyer and content creator. Today's session, we'll be focusing on the proposed third runway at Heathrow Airport. So if we start with the beginner level, Henry, could you just give us first a quick summary, set the scene, what's going on with this Heathrow Airport runway?
Yeah, for sure. So you may or may not have seen in the news that Chancellor Rachel Reeves has recently announced that the government will be supporting the construction of a third runway at Heathrow Airport. And in doing so, the government kind of hopes that this will stimulate kind of economic growth within the UK, enhance sort of investment, and it will also make the UK more connected and sort of even more open for business. But as you can imagine, the announcement of an expansion of a runway at one of the busiest airports, I think globally, or definitely in the UK, has been met with significant criticism, not just from kind of regulatory legal perspective, but also from sort of environmental impact, those that live nearby from a sort of noise pollution impact. So it's going to be an interesting time in terms of looking at how this progresses.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this discussion because, at least for myself, I've been getting kind of these news alerts about this proposed third runway, and I hadn't even connected it in my brain to commercial awareness. So I think it just shows really well that commercial awareness is just this skill that you practice. It's reading the news and then connecting it and being like, oh, there's many things to unpack here. So yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting about this because I think there's actually so much to talk about. So I guess if we start first just by thinking about, because like I said, I initially didn't even connect this to commercial awareness in my brain. So could we first talk about, I guess, what's the type of legal support? Like what would lawyers be needing to be involved in here?
Yeah, for sure, Tori. You're completely right that, as we've spoken about on some of these previous episodes on different topics, that whilst on the surface they kind of seem relatively like, meh, it is what it is. When we kind of unpack this, we'll see that there are a whole sort of array of different aspects or different departments of a firm that will need to be involved in what's going to be such a huge, we could call this a huge project, and it's going to involve a whole host of different sort of sectors. So we're going to have, obviously, we're constructing a new runway. We're going to need the construction team to work on the relevant contracts and get the construction bods in to do that. Who's actually going to be constructing this runway? We're going to need to ensure that we can't necessarily construct a new runway if we don't actually have the land to build that runway on. So we'll need our planning and regulatory teams to help assist with that. Also, we can't necessarily build and construct this runway if we can't afford to do it. So we'll need to look at the ways that the government can kind of look to work with the relevant sort of corporate bodies to finance this arrangement. What's that project financing arrangement going to look like? And also, there are people that live around the space. There are businesses that are around the space. So we might even need the litigation team to be involved in any potential litigation claims that come up as this project goes ahead, because of course this is quite a high profile project, and there is likely going to be met with some kind of, not hostility, but challenge from numerous bodies.
Yeah, you outlined so many things there. So I think it's really, again, so much to discuss. I also like that you mentioned the issue of land, and that you actually, you need the space to build that. I think that could be relevant to a lot of our viewers, because probably many of them are studying land law now. So we're actually seeing, like, here's a real situation in which land law can really come up in a big and significant way.
Yeah, that just gave me PTSD of my land law elective on the LPC.
Yeah, sorry everyone. Okay, well, I think we can move into the intermediate, because now, so we've set the scene. There's this proposed third runway, and there's many different ways in which the lawyers would be involved. So I think in the intermediate level, we can just go into that in a little bit more detail. I think you've given an overview of this already, but I wondered if you wanted to say a little bit more about the different areas of law that could be relevant here.
Yeah, and I think that's what this project really showcases from a commercial perspective, that there is a whole host of sort of, as we spoke about, different areas of law and practice areas that are really going to be impacted on a project like this. And when you're kind of at your firms, when you're training in one department, let's say you are in a banking and finance seat, whilst you'll be focused on the banking and finance work, you could also be working on a project that's actually in the real estate. It's actually a real estate project, but you're working on the finance aspect of it, and you'll also have the various other different teams also working on this one project. That whilst you think, I'm a finance trainee, why am I working on a land property project? That's the sort of angle that you'll need to be kind of thinking about this. And I guess whilst we're on land, I think if we build from the beginner stage and those points that we touched on, whilst we're on the land, as you mentioned, Tori, actually having the land to build the runway on is going to be one of the key issues here. And it may be that the legal team that's handling the legal acquisitions may have to issue what's known as a compulsory purchase order to actually occupy and take ownership of the land that it needs. And effectively what that is, for those that don't know or haven't studied that element of their studies yet, it's effectively an order that allows the government to take ownership of a particular piece of land, and it doesn't necessarily actually need the consent of the landowner to take ownership of that land. So that's something that you may be involved in as a sort of property land trainee, dealing with the sort of planning and regulatory side of things. And then I guess also what comes with that is kind of environmental compliance as well. And that's a huge area that firms are kind of looking at the moment, in terms of environmental, and how can firms be seen to kind of be being involved in that space, because it's huge on the agenda of kind of the net zero deadlines sort of coming up soon. And equally, I guess, from a say you're a firm and you're actually looking to win business from clients. Say you want to take on this project where there's going to be a huge environmental and sustainability angle to it. A lot of firms are being marked when they're pitching for work on their ESG, environmental sort of what they're doing and how they're looking to kind of really push that within their space. So a lot of clients will only work with law firms that meet certain levels of ESG rating. So that's something firms will need to look at. And then in terms of the financing, we briefly spoke about, this is going to cost a lot of money. And there are a lot of different ways that the government can look to finance this. I don't think it's as big a thing anymore, or if there are still some, they're kind of on their way out, was what's known as PFI and PPP contracts, which are kind of private public sector quasi contracts. But I don't think that the government are entering into any more of them. So they'll have to look at how this is going to be funded. Is a private financing board going to finance this, and then the government structure it that way? So there'll be conversations that the corporate team, the finance team will be having to make sure that this is going to actually be able to be funded. And then also we just have, again, the dispute side of things. Are we going to get businesses coming together to bring like a collective claim against the owners of Heathrow Airport and the government for allowing this project to go ahead? What are the groups going to be saying who might be sort of pushing against this, and how are those challenges going to be met? Because again, this is going to be a very visible project. So then we might even need to involve the reputation team to say, how do we handle all of these sort of potential challenges? How do we handle this litigation? Because of course, the government and Heathrow can't be seen as to kind of be shutting down small businesses within the parameters, or forcing people kind of up and out of their houses, or subject to sort of ridiculous sound pollution.
Thank you so much. I feel like, yeah, I have so many thoughts. The first being, thank you so much for highlighting the thing about pitching for work. I think that's such an important thing for candidates to be aware of, is how law firms actually get work and getting a familiarity and understanding of that process. So I just love that you mentioned that. I also think kind of where you were concluding, I think, is where I want to talk about a bit more, because at this intermediate stage, so I guess I should have broken this down with the basic stage, but at the basic stage, we just want to understand the story and understand broadly why it's relevant to commercial awareness. At this intermediate stage, there's really two key elements. There's the first element of how law firms would assist. So that's really, we've gone over that, of there's many different departments that could be involved, many different areas of work that law firms could be getting involved with. But then that second element is the why businesses care. So you're talking a little bit about that, about how businesses might be affected. So I just thought we could just chat a bit more about the kind of commercial considerations that businesses would be thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. So let's focus on the actual project, then kind of ancillary businesses nearby. So this, again, huge project, and we are going to need contractors. We are going to need sort of airlines to be on board. We're going to need staff to actually staff sort of, when you see all the people in the airport doing the stuff on the ground, we're going to need all of those people. So they are also going to be subject to contracts. So they'll need lawyers, as well as, it's not just Heathrow and the government that are going to need legal support. It's also going to be those individuals. It's going to be, I think it's Swissport is one of the main providers of all the apparatus kind of on the ground. An agreement will need to be put in place with them to kind of facilitate the support that they'll provide on this new runway. The staff will need employment contracts if we're getting new staff. If we're kind of moving staff from one spot to another, we may have to, from one organization to another, we may have the impact of a 2P transfer. And again, all of these individuals and sort of businesses will need support. So say you're the supplier of the tarmac, who is your contract going to be? What are the commercials of that? Who is negotiating that on your behalf? Because these are going to be contracts of huge value. So we want to make sure that they are negotiated fairly and that everybody is kind of happy with the aspects of that. And we'll touch on this a bit further in sort of the advanced stage, but the actual kind of the airlines themselves, they are kind of sitting the aircraft on the, I'm not an aviation expert, but the actual aircraft that sits on the tarmac on these runways, they're going to need an agreement in place. Is it just going to be an extension or a renewal of what they currently have in place for the existing runways? How is that going to look? What are the commercials of that? Does it allow for a third runway? Was this ever in the scope of that agreement? How long's left on that agreement? Will we need to kind of renew that, look at the commercials, kind of renegotiate? So this is a project that's going to involve lots and lots of sets of lawyers acting for various different parties. And kind of part of your role as a trainee, if you are assisting on this project, is a lot, regardless of what team you'll be sitting in, you'll kind of be facilitating the kind of the checklist of what documents with whom, what needs to be done, have we had comments in from the third party, and just kind of keeping track of all of the kind of the tasks. Because like speaking about this now, Joy, we can kind of see that there's so many moving parts.
I'm glad you said that. I was actually going to ask this. I think this maybe goes into the advanced level a bit. I think at this point we're doing some overlap, but because you've mentioned quite a few times, like this is a major project, this is a big project. And so then I had this question of basically, to what extent do you think that junior lawyers need to have this kind of project management skill set, or this understanding of how projects are managed and organized?
Yeah, a lot of law firms actually have dedicated like projects teams, and like this in my mind would sit within that team, and then you're kind of coordinating, facilitating, like you work on specific contracts that are related to the overall project, but then also you need to be ensuring that you're managing the data room where contracts and supply agreements and documents are collated. There might be some like tendering documents, pitch documents as well that need to be managed. And really what sort of somebody who's supervising you as a trainee would expect is that you kind of take ownership of at what stage what document is, how can I find this document. If, say, the banking and finance team asked for a copy of X agreement so they can work on the financial documents, the facility agreement, or whatever, however they draft this, it will be your job to kind of know where that is. So I think it's really good to kind of hone those skills now, which I think to an extent a lot of you will be doing in terms of managing your kind of your studies, potential part-time jobs. If you're working as a paralegal whilst doing the SQE, that is a way of kind of showcasing good project management skills. You may not have worked on a huge project before, but if you can showcase how you've sort of put your time in sort of time blocks and how you met certain deadlines, and you can kind of just keep track of things and you have systems in place, they will be really good skills that you can then employ on a project like this.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much for explaining that. I think we can officially move into the advanced stage now. I think with the advanced stage, there's kind of two things I'm thinking about. These are very general, but one being at this advanced level of commercial awareness, we're wanting to take a big picture view. So to be able to see things, you see the big picture. And then I think the other thing at this advanced level is thinking about the complexities of the issue. So where things might be a bit more complicated. So I thought maybe let's start at the big picture. You mentioned at the beginning, this project has the kind of, there's economic considerations, but then there's also some pushback, some environmental concerns, if you want to say more about that.
Yeah, for sure. As you can probably guess, in sort of engaging construction to kind of build a new runway is going to have a huge impact basically on the environment, not only in terms of the actual construction and the building of the new runway itself, but also by increasing the capacity at Heathrow. It's going to mean, of course, more planes going up in the sky, which in turn means more sort of pollution into the environment. So it's going to be sort of the role of the environmental, regulatory and planning teams to kind of ensure that what this runway does and the impact it has is still within relevant sort of legal frameworks. Sorry, because I know that there has been commentary and concerns around this new project impacting the government sort of 2050 like net zero goals, and a whole host of sort of environmental groups and activists have raised concerns around this. And also there will be just purely, I guess, from a kind of just a quality of life perspective, that whilst not legal, there will be actual living people in that area. So the air that they'll be consuming, what's the quality of that saying? And is there, this is kind of just more of a tangent thought, the quality of air that they're breathing, are there any kind of potential medical claims that could come further down the line in terms of what they're inhaling? Is there any correlation between this new runway and let's just say somebody suffered some kind of respiratory issue? There will probably be like medical negligence teams, there will be medical teams at law firms looking into this as well. So again, it's just something to kind of keep in mind, whilst maybe not a direct issue for now. It's something firms should potentially be considering and the impact of that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for outlining that, because I think really at this advanced level, we do really want to be encouraging candidates to be thinking long-term and be proactive in their analysis. And I think that's a perfect example of how you could do that, to think about something that is, it's not an issue now, but it could potentially be. So it's good to be alert to it. So I think that is an excellent overview of the kind of big picture things and some long-term considerations. I just thought then we could maybe come on to some complexities. Are there things about this that you think are particularly complicated that students could bring up in their interviews if they're trying to show an advanced understanding?
Yeah, I feel like from my perspective, some of the biggest commercial considerations to keep in mind are, one, I would say the environmental concerns. That's going to be a huge point of contention, and that's why these teams exist within the law firms. I think financing and how this is going to be structured is also going to be a huge point. And I think because this is such a public-facing construction, because the government have been involved, they've obviously sanctioned it. Rachel Reeves has announced that the financing side of it is going to be under huge scrutiny. So that's going to be looked at, and like all these projects, they always take a lot longer than anticipated. They always cost a lot more. So sort of the impact of that is something to keep in mind. And of course, we're still at the relatively early stages of this project being announced as getting the go-ahead. So over time, and sort of as you're coming up to your interview, which probably I don't generally know when they happen, usually around sort of, you've got a few months probably, around the sort of summertime, to kind of watch how this story progresses and kind of how things come out about it, to kind of track that. So whilst you can kind of pinpoint some key issues now, if you set an alert as you have Tori for the story, you'll be notified on any upcoming changes. So you can say, oh, actually, they've now announced X amount of funding for this. What does that look like? Who's funding this? Of course, you won't have access to everything, but you can have a good understanding of it. So when you go to your firm, you could also see if the firm that you're applying to does a lot of government-related work. I know there's a really big firm here in the UK that does a lot of public-facing or public local authority government-related work. Does this sit within their repertoire? Is this something they're doing? Because if that's a firm that does this kind of work, this is the kind of story that you want to be talking about, for sure. And I would also say, in terms of another big issue to consider, there are obviously things like competition, a challenge from sort of other airports, and I would say that potential litigation and claims is another big key area that the firm who's working on this project will have at the back of their mind, because again, litigation is costly, inexpensive, and if there's mass litigation or claims coming through from sorry, I have a very dry throat today, from sort of local businesses or houses or individuals, then litigation is only going to, one, put the budget of the project at risk, because it's going to cost a lot of money, and also it's going to impact the timings, because if you have to bring or sit through claim after claim, the project may have to go on hold whilst those claims are coming through, and ultimately in turn that's going to push the project deadline back.
Yeah, thanks so much. You said two tips there that I just want to emphasize, because I think they're so useful for our viewers to really note. So the first thing that you suggested is that people follow this story. So I just really want to underline that that's such a great idea. I remember in one of my interviews, they asked me about a story that interested me. So I told them the story, and then they asked, well, what has happened since? How has this developed? And I didn't know. And I felt like that was really a missed opportunity to impress. So I just want to really emphasize, definitely keep up with this. If it's a story, it really does seem like there will be developments. And then the other thing that you suggested that I think is just so useful is for candidates to really look at the departments and the work that the firm that they're interviewing for does, and then connect the story really directly to that firm, that it's work that they're likely to do. And then also, I guess, just the general tip of also choose a story that would be relevant to the firm that you're talking to, that it is actually work that they would do. I just think those are really, really helpful tips. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I would just add on that point, Tori, which say you can go to a firm and talk about a story and a piece of work or something in the news that's really interesting and shows so many commercial examples, but the firm doesn't practice in that area. Whilst I don't think it would necessarily, it's not the worst thing in the world if you can really kind of show like the commercial elements of this story, but it kind of shows that perhaps you haven't really researched this firm and the type of work that they do. So again, it's really good having a story that kind of aligns with that, and maybe have a backup story that you followed just in case. And again, on the point of following up and continuing to follow a story, I think if it's a story that really interests you, you can really kind of then kind of go beyond surface level, and kind of how we've done here, gone from beginning, intermediate, and advanced. If you've really followed the story and engaged with it and said it's developed, so maybe we could advise clients this, even if you're not going to be expected to be giving sound sort of commercial recommendations at the level that you're at, but then it showcases some kind of additional thoughts. And I think we may have said this before, but if not, one thing a supervisor always said to me is, when you kind of list out what the legal points are, then just ask yourself, so what? So what does this actually mean for the client? So you can say, this is going to be a new runway installed at Heathrow. It could have some environmental concerns. Okay, cool. So what does that mean for Heathrow and the government as a client? Okay, we could have challenges from this. We could have a whole host of issues that we've just spoken about. So I think it's really good to just, and even not just an interview, when you're kind of writing things, advice to clients, you're writing responses to questions that you're being asked as part of a online application process, always just ask, so what does this actually mean?
Thank you so much. I think that's probably the perfect note to conclude on, unless you had anything else that you wanted to say.
I don't have anything else.
I think that is the perfect thing to conclude on, because I just wanted to conclude by reminding students that, again, commercial awareness it's not just about regurgitating what you read on the news. It really is about explaining why would law firms care, why would businesses care. And so I think your advice of just always ask yourself, so what? I think that's just a perfect tip for our viewers to take away. So thank you to everyone who has tuned in today for Commercial Awareness Compass. Join us next week to keep building your commercial awareness. And until then, prepare without the panic.